Our next reading is Financial Statement Analysis Technique. These are the learning outcome statements covered within this reading. Let us start one by one and briefly have a quick overview of all these. First, describe tools and techniques used in financial analysis, including their uses and limitations. First tool we have used previously is common size statements. When you say common size statements, could be common size balance sheet, common size income statement, common size cash flow statement. Then within the common size financial statement analysis, we discussed the vertical common size analysis, in which we take the total of balance sheet as the base, and each number on the balance sheet is expressed as a percentage of the total assets, of the total liabilities and equity. It could be horizontal as well. We take a base year and all the numbers for the following years are expressed as the percentage of base year numbers. Likewise, we use income statement, common size income statement analysis, where we use sales as our base, and each number in the income statement was expressed as a percentage of sales. It's called vertical common size income statement analysis. It could be done horizontally as well, where we take a certain year as a base year, like 2020, and each of the following years numbers are expressed as a percentage of the base years. And we discussed cash flow statement can be expressed in the common size. Either we take the sales revenue as the base and every number in the cash flow statement is expressed as the percentage of sales, or we can use the total inflows to serve as a base for every inflow and the total outflows to serve as a base for every single outflow in the cash flow statement. These are the two. So this is one of the ways, one of the tools we use. We can compare the income statements, balance sheet of two dissimilar businesses, and it could be much more beneficial for us for making good analysis. Then we have certain graphs like these staked column graphs, where you can express numbers as a fractional part of these bars. As you can see, trade payables are represented by this light blue color, and over the period there is an increase in trade payables. Cash is represented by darker blue color, and accordingly this grayish color represents your lease obligations. So you can see the proportional size of these charts can help us have an idea how they are composed over the period from 2004 to the next 8. Then we can use line charts as well, indicating the downward or upward trend on these different elements of the financial statements. Ratios, that's what we'll be discussing today. Ratios, one of the major tools we use, but it is not without its limitations. The major limitation of ratios is that accounting treatment may differ. One of your subsidiary is operating in a country where IFRS financial statements are required to be prepared under IASB standards, and another subsidiary is operating in the US, where the financial statements are prepared under the US GAAP. So there are differences, many differences are there. So these differences could pose a problem for us for comparison purposes. Then ratios do not speak for themselves. They are not useful. Ratios will be helpful only when they are compared. You need some suitable comparator. Your last year could be the comparison base. Industry average could be the comparison base, or it could be your leading competitor. So ratios do not speak for themselves. Then you need a comparator with which you can compare whether the information, whether the performance has improved or deteriorated over the period. And the ratios alone are not sufficient. You will have to use the judgments as well. Your judgments and your analytical skills are essential part of ratio analysis. So that completes your first LOS. Second, classify, calculate and interpret activity, liquidity, solvency, profitability and valuation ratios. 5 set of ratios. The first one is activity ratios. These set of ratios tell us how firm has used its different assets, fixed assets, total assets. So activity ratio measures how well a firm utilizes various assets. We'll discuss various formulas within activity ratio. Then another set of ratios is liquidity ratio. Liquidity is the business ability to pay off short-term obligations when they fall due. So these ratios assess the ability of a firm to meet its short-term obligations when they fall due. There are many ratios. We'll discuss all these one by one. Then the next set of ratios are solvency ratios. Solvency ratios, as the name suggests, they measure the financial risk, solvency risk. So we'll discuss these in later slides. Then another set of ratios, profitability ratios. As the name suggests, these ratios help us assess how well the company has generated profits based on different investments employed. And the last set of ratios are valuation measures or valuation ratios. They are used in analysis for investments in common equity. So all these ratios will be studied one by one. Let us first start with the activity ratios. As I said, activity ratios, they give an indication how well a firm utilizes various assets such as inventory and fixed assets. Let us discuss these ratios. What do they mean? How do we calculate them? First is the receivables turnover. Ideally, it should be calculated based upon credit sales. Unfortunately, on your financial statements, you're not given the breakup of credit and cash sales. So you will have to take the number given on the financial statements as your annual sales divided by average receivable. Now the question that you might ask, that annual sales taken from the income statement, why do we need to take the average of receivables? Remember a very fine point. Whenever you're linking an income statement item with a balance sheet item, since income statement is for the particular period, for the year, for the quarter, for a 6 months period, so it covers a certain period, but receivable balance is on a particular date, on the balance sheet date. So instead of just using a balance sheet number, if it is possible to calculate the average receivable, take the opening balance of receivables plus closing balance of receivables and divide it with 2. Remember, you have to take the net average receivables after deducting the allowance for uncollectible accounts. Net credit sales, ideally, if not given, take the annual sales, and in the denominator, take the net average receivables. Now what this ratio measures? This ratio measures how many times do your customers pay you in 1 year. Let's say if my annual sale is $100,000 and my average receivable balance is $20,000, it means they pay me 5 times in 1 year. They pay me 5 times in 1 year. Sometimes this ratio looks little confusing. 5 times mean what? I would like to calculate in days. After how many days do my trade receivables or my average trade receivables pay me? For this, we have an alternative formula. We divide receivable turnover, 365 divided by receivable turnover, like just we calculated, it was 5. So it means if you calculate this, this will give you after how many days does your average receivable, average customer pay you. I would prefer this formula. This is a good one which you can use in multiple situations. Average collection period is equal to your average receivable. This is my favorite formula. I don't need to memorize these two. This single formula will be sufficient and I can calculate anything I want to. Average receivables upon your annual sales multiplied by 365. Sometimes you might be given 360 or 300, whatever is given in the question. You should take those numbers of in 1 year. So average collection period or day sales outstanding tells you how many days does your average receivable take to pay you. This calculates how many times your receivables pay you in 1 year, and this calculates after how many days does your average receivable pay you. So this number has to be higher. The higher the better, and this number has to be lower. It means you have to get more frequent payments from your customers, or your customers should pay in less number of days. The next ratio is inventory turnover. It is calculated by dividing cost of goods sold with average inventory. Cost of goods sold is an income statement item and inventory is from balance sheet. I just told you if linking income statement item with the balance sheet item must be averaged. Now what this gives me? It tells me how many times do I replenish my inventory or how many times do I sell my inventory, or how many times my inventory rotates in 1 year. Higher the number, the better. Let's say my CGS is 50,000 and my average inventory is, let's say, 25,000. It means my stock sells 2 times in 1 year. Twice it is replenished, refilled, twice a year. Now I would like to calculate after how many days do I need to buy my stock. So it's similar in the same way, just like 365 upon receivable turnover, we have 365 upon inventory turnover. This will give you after how many days it takes your stock to sell and to replenish, right? So they are almost similar in nature. Next we have payables turnover. Ideally you should have credit purchases, because this is what drives the accounts payable balance, but that is not possible from income statement. So whatever the purchases number is given, you need to take it. Since it is from the income statement and trade payables are from balance sheet, so they must be averaged. So purchases upon average trade payables, this tells you how many times do you pay to your payables in 1 year. Let's say if the number comes 15, it means you pay 15 times to your payables in 1 year. I would like to calculate after how many days do I pay, or how many days do I take to pay my average payable, the number of days the payables stay outstanding. We'll do the same thing, 365 divided by the payables turnover. This will give you after how many days do you take to pay to your supplier. Now ideally you should collect as quickly as possible within the credit terms with your customers. Your inventory should rotate as frequently as possible in 1 year, and within the credit term with your vendors, you should delay as much as possible without damaging your relationship with your vendors. This will give you certain cushion of cash. Collect as quickly as possible, delay as late as possible without damaging your relationship with your vendor. That will leave sufficient cash to be used for business operations. Next set of ratios relate to fixed assets, how well they have been used. Fixed assets turnover. It's revenue divided by average net fixed assets. As I said, revenues from income statement and fixed assets from the balance sheet, so they must be averaged. What this ratio tells me, let's say if my revenue is $500,000 for the period and my average fixed assets net, means after deducting for accumulated depreciation and any impairment losses, net fixed assets average balance, let's say for the sake of simplicity, 100,000. What this ratio tells me? It tells me that $1 of investment in fixed assets has generated sales of $5. Good or bad, I can't say unless I have some suitable comparator. $5 sale has been generated by investing $1 in fixed assets. Fine, ratio looks good, but we must also appreciate that there are certain assets available in the current assets category. They are also involved in generating revenue. We can't just ignore them. So in order to bring them in the loop, we take average total assets. So now let us consider our revenue for the period was $500,000 and our total assets, average total assets, including your inventories, your account receivables, marketable securities, all these current assets, the given result is 2.5, which means $1 investment in assets, fixed and current as well, generates sales of $2.5. Good or bad, we can't say. The higher the number, the better. It means you are using more assets more effectively. Let's say another business has $10 to 1. Means $1 investment in asset has generated sales of $10. So they have made good use of the assets. All right, next ratio is working capital turnover. Working capital turnover is similar to these. It's revenue upon average working capital. So revenue upon fixed assets, revenue upon total assets, or revenue could be working capital based on working capital as well. For example, if your revenue is $500,000 and your working capital is 50, the result is 10. So it means for $1 investment in working capital, sale generated is $10. Good or bad, again, it's totally dependent upon the context, and you're talking about comparator, maybe your competitor, industry average, the last prior years could be the base to give a judgment. All right, moving on. Liquidity. This is the next set of ratios. Liquidity here refers to the ability to pay short-term obligations that when they fall due. The first ratio is current ratio, current assets upon current liabilities. It includes your account receivables net. It includes your inventories, raw material, work in progress, finished goods, includes your marketable securities, your prepayments, includes cash and bank as well. Divided with current liabilities gives you current ratio. Let's say if it's 2:1, means for every $1 liability, I have $2 of current assets. Right now, this is quite a lenient measure of liquidity because there are certain assets that are not easily convertible to cash, like your account, like inventory. It takes time. You need to sell inventory first on credit, then you collect money from your receivables later. So if you remove inventory, which takes time in cash conversion, and if you remove prepayments, what you get is called the quick ratio. Quick ratio is basically current assets minus inventory and minus your prepayments gives you what you call the quick assets, cash, marketable securities, and receivables. This is a more conservative measure of liquidity, quick ratio. We can make it even more conservative by eliminating receivables because sometimes our receivables might take time to pay us back. So we just take cash and marketable securities upon current liabilities. This is the most conservative ratio, 1.5 ratio 1. For every $1 liability we have to settle, for that we have $1.5 of cash and cash equivalents. There is one more ratio not given here but I would like to discuss called cash flow ratio. It is cash flow from operations divided by current liabilities. It's a more meaningful liquidity measure because these are all static numbers on the balance sheet date. Whereas cash flow from operations, this is the cash generated by operations. It is what fraction of current liability. It measures quite reasonably the ability of a business to pay cash to settle the current liabilities out of operating cash flows. It's a more dynamic ratio. So this is one of the liquidity ratios as well. Then defensive interval. Let's say your average expenditure is $10,000. This is what you need for daily expenses. Your cash balance is $50,000. Your marketable securities, let's say $150,000, and your receivables are $100,000. So if this is the total number, 50, 150, 200, $300,000 represents your current assets excluding stock, and your average daily expenditure is 10,000, which means you have 30 days worth of quick assets available. This is your daily expenditure and this is what is available in the quick assets to cover. So it means 30 days coverage is available. Next is cash conversion cycle. Cash conversion, before doing cash conversion cycle, let us first discuss the operating cycle. Operating cycle is the time taken when we acquire raw material, convert it into products, sell it to your customer and collect the money from your account receivable. The time taken from selling the goods to the customer, holding on to your stock for some time and getting the money back is called operating cycle. It is calculated by adding two things. Inventory turnover in days, remember it must be in days, not turnover ratio, that the number of times, and your account receivable turnover in days. Means for how long do you keep your inventory with you? How long does your average receivable take to pay you? Adding these two gives you the size of operating cycle. Now, what is cash cycle? If you deduct your account payable turnover days, it's the number of days that you take to pay to your accounts payable, it gives you cash conversion cycle. Sales day outstanding, that's your account receivable turnover days. Inventory days, from this if you deduct the number of days you take to pay your payables, it gives you the cash conversion cycle. The shorter, the better. Operating cycle, the shorter, the better. More quickly, when the cycle turns, you get cash. Next set of ratios are solvency ratios. As I said, solvency ratios give information on the firm's financial leverage and ability to meet its long-term obligations. These ratios measures financial risk. These ratios measure solvency, ability of the business to pay long-term obligation. Liquidity is the ability to pay the current obligations as they fall due, and solvencies for the long-term obligations. The first ratio is debt to equity. Total debt, including current liabilities and long-term liabilities, it is what fraction of stockholders' equity. Let's say if your total debt is $100,000 and equity is 50. What does it tell me? For every $1 invested by the stockholders, debt is $2, indicating a problem for the stockholders. For every $1 he has invested, the company has $2 of debt. There is a higher financial risk in this case. Next, debt to capital. Total debt means the current liabilities and long-term liabilities divided by the total debt. The same numerator is in the denominator as well, plus total shareholders' equity. Basically, this is the total of your total assets. So basically, debt to capital is the same as debt to assets. Total debts upon total assets, or total debt upon total debt plus shareholders' equity. The total is total because it's the balance sheet. See, look at this. This is your balance sheet. This is your total debt, long-term and current debt, plus your equity, and this is equal to assets. So you can write this way: long-term debt plus current liabilities upon your total assets. So debt to capital or debt to assets, they are the same effectively. See this one, total debt upon total asset. They are the same. It's just that looking at two different aspects of the same thing. Next ratio, financial leverage. Average total assets is how many times of your total equity. Let's say a business has total assets of $500,000 and the equity is just $100,000. 5 times. What does it mean? We know total assets can be split into, or can be written on the other side, assets is equal to capital plus liability. If the capital is $100,000, which is in the numerator as well, then out of this $500,000, $400,000 represents debt. Quite a significant part. If this number is higher, it means we have more debt than equity, because debt is a part of the other side of the equation. So if you have a higher numerator as denominator, indicating the business has a high financial leverage. Next, interest coverage. Earning before interest and tax can cover your interest how many times? Let's say your EBIT is $100,000 and interest is $10,000, which means you can pay your interest 10 times. Even you have to pay just once. You have to pay your interest once. It just measures the comfort level with which you can pay your interest. So the EBIT is sufficient enough to pay the interest 10 times, right? So it means less risk for the fund providers, those who have given you the loan or those who have bought bonds from the company. So next is the fixed charge coverage. We want to bring in the lease payments as well. So earning before interest and tax, add back lease payments, and in the denominator have interest and lease payments. So this will show you how much or how many times can you pay your interest payments and lease payments out of the available profit before the lease payments. Something similar, but they have incorporated lease payments in the numerator and the denominator as well. Next set of ratios are profitability ratios. As I said, profitability ratios measure the overall performance of the firm relative to revenues, assets, equity, and capital. Profit is a percentage of revenue, percentage of assets, percentage of equity, percent of capital. So there are many ways to measure the profit. So basically, profitability ratio measure how well the management is doing in turning their efforts into generating profits based upon these denominators. First one you are quite familiar with: net profit margin, net profit upon sales. Gross profit margin, also called the trading profit, is gross profit upon sales or revenue. Pre-tax profit, operating profit. This is earning before tax, of course, after interest upon revenue. So these are different levels of profit. We discussed in our income statement that the profitability can be measured at different levels. So these are the net profit after interest and tax, operating profit, EBT, and the gross profit is the trading profit. These are the different performance measures. There is also a performance measure called EBITDA, that is earning before tax, depreciation, and amortization. This was floated way back in early 90s when the dot-com bubbles were bursting. So in order to make such high-tech companies look somewhat acceptable for investors, they came up with this measure, EBITDA. Why? Because these startups had a lot of investments in technology, resulting in very high depreciation on assets, their servers, their web machines, etc. And since they utilized expensive software, so their amortization and depreciation was a major expense. When these charges were deducted from revenue, the profits turned into losses. So situation didn't look good. So in order to determine their performance, they came up with this idea, EBITDA, earning before interest and tax. We are familiar with this one, but before depreciation and amortization, two major expenses for tech firms. So this was also and still is being used to measure the performance of some firms where we want to eliminate the impact of depreciation and amortization, because these can distort the performance of divisions, and we want to measure the performance of specific managers. Next set of ratios, return on assets. Net income is what percentage of the total assets? Similar, net income from income statement and your total assets from the balance sheet, they must be average. So net income is what percentage of total assets, how well assets have been utilized in generating net income. Again, the ratio will not speak. You will have to compare it with some suitable comparator. Last year, competitor, industry average. Return on assets could be calculated this way as well. Net income, we add back after tax interest and divide it with the total averages. This is another derived form of return on assets. Mostly we use this one. This is the one you will use frequently in questions. Then operating return on assets. This profit is after interest and after tax. We want to take the profit that is more in control of a particular manager. For that we take EBIT, before interest and tax, upon average total assets, just like the previous one. EBITDA, this could also be taken as a numerator, as expressed as a percentage of total assets. Return on total capital. This is now the other side of the picture. Total assets is one side of the balance sheet. Now we can take on the other side where we have liabilities and equity. Taking this part specifically as a denominator now, return on total assets is equal to EBIT upon total capital. It could be taken on net income basis. Then we have return on common equity. This is the net income adjusted for preferred stock dividend. It's what percentage of the average common equity. Or we can also calculate, this is also called the net income available to common stockholder, IACS. So these are all profitability measures. I'm sure you would have gone through these formulas through your textbooks in earlier studies. Now the next, so we've just gone through these formulas. You need to memorize these formulas because memorization will help you solve many questions involving use of formula. Next LOS is describe relationship among ratios and evaluate a company using ratio analysis. Ratios are linked. Now look at this current ratio over the period, which is calculated current assets upon current liabilities. It has increased over the period from 1.2 to 1.5 to 2. So it means over the period your current assets have proportionally increased more than current liabilities. At the same time, your quick ratio has fallen. What does it mean? Quick ratio and current ratio, their difference is caused by inventory and prepayments. What does it tell us? So there is no indication of prepayments. We can assume that this difference in these two ratios is caused by inventory. Inventory swelling over the period. Inventory has increased over the period, more investment in inventory. That's why the gap between your current and quick ratio is becoming significant from 2:6 to 2:8. Days of inventory. How many days do you hold your inventory? Look at this now. This is the reason why it's so. First it was 30 days, now 50, and in the current year to next 8, your inventory is held for 60 days. This is the reason why your current ratio is getting bigger. And lastly, day sales outstanding. In 2:6, your average receivable paid within 40 days. Now within 30 days, and now because of good credit administration, you are able to reduce your time to half. Now your receivables pay you within 20 days. So you can interpret these ratios if you know the formula and if you know what they mean. This was required in this LOS. Next, demonstrate the application of DuPont analysis of return on equity and calculate and interpret effects of changes in its components. DuPont model basically was originated in a company with the same name. It's a French company as far as I remember. It's a chemical manufacturer. So that's where they came up with the idea that instead of just simply calculating return on equity, we can split the return on equity in its components. So it's an approach that can be used to analyze the return on equity, because we know return on equity is simply net income upon average equity. What if we decompose net income and average equity, and then we see what are the different elements from the financial statement that affect return on equity? So let us take first the basic one. Return on equity is net income upon average equity. Let us break this down into two parts. Now look at this. This revenue and revenue cancelled out in the numerator denominator. The net impact is the same. Net income upon average equity. The same formula which you have here. It's just that we have multiplied the numerator and the denominator with revenue. Numerator and denominator. This gives us another dimension. Net income upon revenue. This is your net profit margin. See? And revenue upon average equity is called equity turnover. So by incorporating revenue in the numerator and denominator, we have split ROE into two subparts. We can further expand the idea this way. Now look at this again. Revenue cancelled out. It's like previous one. Average total asset cancelled out. The original formula still holds true. Net income upon equity. Return on equity. We have now incorporated average total assets. Why did we do so? This is the same. Net income upon revenue is net profit margin. Revenue upon average total assets, we just discussed a little while ago, it's assets turnover. Now we come up with something new in this formula. Leverage ratio. We discussed this also in the previous slides. Average total assets upon equity is called leverage ratio. Now we can analyze the impact upon equity on these individual elements. We can extend it to even further, five-way DuPont model. If you just look at this, equilibrium is still maintained. EBT cancelled out. EBIT cancelled out. Revenue cancelled out. Average assets. Still we have the net income and average equity as your denominator. That is your return on equity. These five components one by one. Net income upon EBT is the tax burden. If you solve this, it's the simplification of this formula is simply 1 minus tax percentage. Net income upon EBT is basically 1 minus tax. This is called the interest burden. Pre-interest income and post-interest income. This you will study in your leverage in your next book 4. Then EBIT upon revenue. This is the same. This is EBIT margin. Just like your net profit expressed as a sale. This is EBIT expressed as sale. EBIT margin. Revenue upon average assets discussed as an assets turnover, and assets upon average equity is the same from the previous slide. Average assets upon average equity is financial leverage. So now you can see this is the full extended version of return on equity. Even their simplification gives you net income upon equity, but now we can see its impact. I've shared with you the video. It contains lots of questions of DuPont model, maybe 15 to 20 questions related to DuPont model, involving these five extended five-way model as well. So you will know how each impacts the overall ROE, and it will get you much finer detail about this DuPont model. So this is how we can see the impact of individual components of ROE. How does it change? If the denominator increases, it will reduce. As the increase in denominator will reduce the ratio, ROE will fall. If any of the numerator increases, it will increase ROE. So you can see by in plugging in the numbers if you are given, and then you can make sense out of it. Now next set of ratios are valuation ratios. These ratios are used in comparing the relative valuation of companies. It's used primarily for equity analysis and for credit analysis. Equity analysis means analyzing stock, which one to invest in, which one to divest from. These are the ratios we will be using later in our studies. Price earning ratios, price earning multiples, EPS, DIPS, already discussed. Market price on cash flow ratios, market price over sales per share, market price per share over book value per share. These are all ratios that we use in analyzing stocks. Or it could be earning before interest and tax per share upon sales, or EBIT upon sales, net income upon employees, or sales per employee. So these are all the ratios which will be used in different contexts for equity analysis. For credit analysis, this is for analyzing a firm's ability to honor its financial obligation. Will the business be able to pay its obligation when they fall due, interest, etc. Interest coverage discussed, Z-scores, EBIT upon assets, revenue over assets, market price per share or book value per share. All these will be discussed later. Just a list was given. These are the ratios used in valuation measures. Next, within the valuation measures, we have sustainable growth rate. This you will use in conjunction with your DuPont model. They are there in the question, the video file I shared with you. Sustainable growth rate measures how fast the firm can grow without additional external equity. Because firm earns some profit. If I earned $100,000, out of it if 20,000 is given as dividend, 80,000 has been retained. This retained profit will serve as a source of finance. This retained profit will serve as a source of finance. So it measures how fast the firm can grow without additional external equities and using your retained earning as a source of finance. To estimate the sustainable growth rate, we use this formula. There are many questions in the videos you will see. I'm just giving you the overview. The main things are the questions. How to apply these. So sustainable growth rate is equal to retention ratio RR multiplied by return on equity, which we discussed in the previous slides. What is retention ratio? It's very simple. If you have earned $100, paid $10 as dividend, what you have retained is 90%. This 90% is called the retention ratio, or this can be calculated this way. If your net income was 100, you paid dividend 10, 100 minus 10 is 90 divided by 190%. This is the retention rate. How much have you paid? Out of it, if you deduct what you earned minus what is paid, the remaining is called the retention, and this serves as a formula to calculate the sustainable growth rate without resorting to external equity. Next is the business risk. Business risk is risk of incurring a loss or earning lower profit. This is normally how conventionally the business risk is defined. But when we see with regard to valuation, business risk is the volatility in revenues. Volatility is considered as risk in financial management. Volatility is risk. Standard deviation is a measure of risk. And what standard deviation measures? It measures volatility, dispersion. So, business risk is volatility in your earnings, volatility in your net incomes, and this is how we can calculate volatility in your sales, volatility in your income, in your operating income. Coefficient of variation, I'm sure you remember from statistics. So coefficient of variation of sales, it's standard deviation of sales, volatility in sales divided by average sales. If the number is higher, it means the sales are variable, volatile. There is volatility in sales, so the profits will be volatile as well, because sales eventually feed into the calculation of net profits. So if the sales are volatile, your profitability will be volatile as well. Volatility in net income, that is standard deviation of net income upon average net income, will measure how volatile your net income is as well as for operating. So these are the three measures we use to calculate the volatility in these three measures, which eventually measure your business risk. Next, business segment. A business like those from Pakistan, they will know that there is a firm in Pakistan, Agro Foods. It has certain segments, Alper, Omor, etc., Onaj, etc. So sometimes the business is split up into specific domains, specific segments. Our standards tell us, your US GAAP specifically, that if any part of the business holds 10% of profits, 10% of assets, or 10% of revenue, it represents a significant sub-part of the business and must be reported separately. So what is a business segment? It's a portion of larger company that accounts for more than 10% of revenues, assets, or profits. So IFRS GAAP require you to report such segments separately. Why? Because they are distinguishable segment of the larger organization, having its unique risk and return. More or less self-contained. It has its own stream of revenues. It has its own distinguishable expenses. So they account for 10% of your revenue or assets or profit. So they must be reported separately for analytical purpose, because in balance sheet or income statement, what you see is a totaling or netting off of different, like a business may have 20 divisions, but when you see the balance sheet or income statement, you get aggregate sales, aggregate cost of sales, and aggregate profit. What if certain segments are significant and they need to be analyzed separately? So we need to break them up. We need to show a breakdown of these segments so as we can analyze performance well. So we will use our ratio analysis on these separate segments. We'll calculate their asset utilization, the return on asset, just like we do for the normal main business segment. Your last LOS is describe how ratio analysis and other techniques can be used to model and forecast earnings. It all starts with sales. Those who have studied budgeting, they would know that it all starts from sales. Your sales department gives you input, budgeted sales for the quarter, and it serves as a seed from which we draw up our production budget, our marketing budget, our purchase budget, our selling and administration budget, budgeted cost of goods sold, budgeted inventories of work in process and finished goods. It works similarly for financial analysis as well. Sales is a starting point. Starting point is sales. And pro forma means budgeted. Mind the word, pro forma means budgeted or estimated or almost or virtual, not actual. Financial statement which are called pro forma financial statement, they are budgeted financial statement, estimated. They do not represent the actual numbers, the audited one or the one that are objective, driven from the company's accounting system. So pro forma financial statements are estimated or budgeted financial statement based upon certain assumption, based upon ratios, taking sales as our base and expressing each number as a percentage of sales. We can convert those into dollar amounts and we can draw up financial statements. And these financial statements then will help us assess the company's profitability, solvency, liquidity in the future, taking sales as a base. We will take last year, let's say we have 2019 and 2018's data. We can calculate the percentages, convert them in the common size. We can expect a certain sales growth over the period, and these percentages then can be converted into actual dollar-based income statement, budgeted one for 2021 or 2022. Keeping certain assumptions, because whenever you prepare budgets and forecasts, there are certain assumptions that we expect the sales to grow by 10%, CGS will expect it to grow by 5% of the last period. So we can come up with the dollar-based financial statements and see how things move in the future. Projections. How do we do it? There are three methods. One is sensitivity analysis, simply put as what if. What if selling price is reduced by 10%? How would it affect my income statement and the balance sheet items? What if the cost of production, direct material, direct labor, goes up by 5%? How would it affect my cost of production, manufacturing cost, eventually my GP and net profit margins? So sensitivity analysis, it's a what if analysis. It's based upon certain assumption. What if certain element is changed to this extent? What will happen? How the numbers will change? Remember, pro forma financial statements are prepared on Excel sheets. If the basic underlying assumptions are changed, entire set of financial statement is revised. That's why it's called pro forma estimated. Any underlying assumption, if it's changed, it will revise all the estimated numbers shown in your cash flow statement, income statement, as well as balance sheet. Next is scenario analysis. It takes a wider look. It's based upon different scenarios. Scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and taking all these variables within these scenarios and then constructing the a set of financial statement under these different conditions. Third one, we use is simulation. Here we extensively use computers to draw up the maximum swing in a certain variable. Like for example, direct material is single most important factor determining our profitability, for example. So using computer simulation, we can model it and see what could be the maximum minimum swing in this variable. And let's say then direct labor or the other costs that make up our major part of our profitability. Accordingly, we can use this as our base to drive the numbers, and they will serve as the basic parts of our complete balance sheet. Gentlemen, this is your reading financial statement analysis. We'll be starting question just in 5 minutes.